It was a Tuesday. One of those deceptive, clear-skied mornings where you expect nothing more than back-to-back meetings and maybe, if you're lucky, a sandwich that hasn't been microwaved into rubber. I walked into Larkwell and Company like I had for the past 6 years. Same ID badge. Same elevator that creaked a little on the 10th floor. Same receptionist who gave me the usual tight-lipped nod. Everything felt familiar, until it didn't. My name's Everett Hale, and my wife, Miranda Vale, is the CEO of Larkwell and Company. Yeah, you read that right. My boss is also the woman I share a mortgage with. Or at least, I used to. I got the summons at 9:02 a.m. A calendar notification from Miranda's executive assistant. Subject: Urgent discussion, executive office. I thought it was a project issue. Maybe a client crisis. Or maybe, if I was being naively hopeful, it was finally time for that promotion talk I'd brought up every quarter for the past 3 years. But when I opened her door, I knew. Miranda sat behind her pristine glass desk in a blazer I hadn't seen before, navy with silver trim, like she'd chosen armor for the occasion. She didn't look up at first, just tapped a printed email with her manicured nail. Her tone was ice over steel. I consider this disloyal. Disloyal. Not ineffective. Not unprofessional. Not dishonest. No. Disloyal. I glanced at the paper. It was an internal memo from another company, Didnt Nexus. When I had interviewed with last Thursday, I told Miranda I had a dental appointment, which wasn't a total lie. I did have one, just not at a dentist's office. I opened my mouth to explain, but she cut me off. Don't bother denying it. Security will escort you from the premises. You can collect your personal belongings, but your badge and building access are revoked immediately. No raised voice. No fury. Just calculated dismissal. She pushed my badge across the desk like it was evidence in a trial. You want to know the funny thing? It wasn't getting fired by my own wife that stung the most. It was realizing, in that cold moment under fluorescent lights, that I had stopped being her equal years ago, and I was the only one who didn't notice. When Miranda and I first started at Larkwell, we were both on the grind. Late nights, ramen dinners at our desks, brainstorming client campaigns while folding laundry. Back then, we were a team. We even called ourselves Hale and Vale like we were our own agency. I loved that version of us. But then things shifted. Slowly. Quietly. Like water eroding rock. She rose faster. Got noticed by the board earlier. Started getting CC'd on emails I wasn't. At first, I was proud. Of course I was. She's brilliant. No denying that. But then came the subtle exclusions. Client dinners I wasn't invited to, strategic planning sessions where I was looped in later, raises and titles passed over with the explanation, we don't want to look like we're favoring you. Favoring me? I had landed the Richter account. I'd brought in Stratos Bank after 3 months of cold calls and coffee meetings. I had single-handedly salvaged a $1 million client after one of the junior execs forgot to deliver assets on deadline. But none of that was counted. Why? Because Miranda and I shared a bed. I was the conflict of interest in her story of success. She told me once, after a third denied raise, that she couldn't be seen elevating her husband. I asked her, dead serious, then what am I doing here? She didn't answer, but she did start referring to me in meetings as Everett from Strategy. Not my husband. Not Everett Hale. Just a staff title. Disposable. Replaceable. Shrink-wrapped into a box. Still I stayed. I justified it. Said I was being supportive. That I was sacrificing for the bigger picture. But looking back, I was being silent while I was slowly erased. 3 years of quarterly raise proposals. You know the kind. Nicely formatted PDFs with market data, performance graphs, client revenue tied directly to my work. Every time, the same rehearsed lines. Budget's tight. We're focusing on infrastructure. You're valued, Everett. Just not this quarter. Yet I watched as newer staff, many who shadowed me, got better titles, bigger bonuses, newer offices. One of them even got the private parking spot I was promised in my last review. Miranda said it was out of her hands. I said nothing. Until I didn't. One night, after another lukewarm conversation about my invaluable behind-the-scenes role, I opened my laptop and updated my resume for the first time in 6 years. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Reed Dalton. Said he'd been following my campaigns for a while and wanted to talk. That they were thinking of expanding their internal marketing division and needed a strategist who could build something from the ground up. I took a half day off. Told Miranda it was for a dental appointment. I wore a tie and everything. Even brought floss just in case she asked questions. The interview went well. Too well. They asked about my experience. I told them. They pulled up some of my public work and praised the clean data-driven approach. Reed leaned in and said, "You've been the ghost behind Larkwell's wins, haven't you?" I smiled. "I've definitely contributed." He laughed. "You're polite. I like that. But I can see it. Your fingerprints are all over their growth." He ended the meeting with a handshake and these words, "We'll be in touch. And I hope next time we meet, it's as colleagues." And then, Tuesday happened. Miranda found out. Whether it was through HR chatter, an email leak, or just plain paranoia, I don't know. But what I do know is she didn't ask why. Didn't say, "Everett, what's going on?" Didn't say, "Are you unhappy?" Didn't say, "Why didn't you tell me?" No. She went full CEO. Revoked my badge. Labeled me disloyal. Made a scene without making a scene. Surgical and clinical. But the thing she never realized was that I wasn't interviewing because I was trying to hurt her. I was interviewing because I was already hurt. I didn't need her approval. I needed space to breathe. To be seen again, not as her husband, not as a PR liability, but as the professional I knew I was. Now, sitting at home in sweatpants, I opened my laptop and looked at the PDF of my final denied raise request. Page 4. The summary slide. Projection. If provided a 20% salary adjustment, Everett Hale will bring in an additional $3.2 million in revenue growth over the next 12 months. The timestamp? 8 months ago. You want to guess what the actual numbers were? $3.6 million. And that was just from 2 clients, Richter and Crestline. I delivered. I over-delivered. And I got canned for looking for a new pasture. But here's what Miranda didn't know. Reed didn't just want to offer me a role. He wanted me to build the entire division. From scratch. He wanted my voice in branding, in client relations, in campaign direction. Not just to execute, but to shape vision. Something I hadn't been allowed to do at Larkwell for years. I stared at my inbox, then hit reply. Subject, Thursday meeting. Message. Hi Reed. Thursday still works. Looking forward to the next conversation. Everett. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the faint reflection in the laptop screen. Miranda called it disloyalty, but I call it choosing myself. And if that makes me the villain in her boardroom, then so be it. I'd rather be the villain in her story than the ghost in my own. It's strange, the things you remember when your world starts shifting. I didn't remember the 6 years of working late to clean up someone else's mess. I didn't think about the dozens of campaigns I brought across the finish line. No. What I remembered most, in that moment, was how quiet the office suddenly became when I picked up that cardboard box. You know the one. The "you've been fired" box. I had left it under my desk for years. Always joked that I'd use it when we moved floors during expansions. Turns out, it had a much colder purpose. I kept it classy. I didn't sweep everything into it like I was storming out. No dramatic slamming of desk drawers. Just slow, intentional movements. Framed photo of my brother and I from a hiking trip in Oregon. The branded coffee mug Miranda gave me 2 years ago. To my favorite strategist, it said, "Now just a dull joke." A couple of notebooks, my blue pen, and the ceramic paperweight in the shape of a lion I'd gotten at a company retreat. 6 items. 6 years. That's all it took to erase it. People watched me, but no one said a word. No one dared. Some gave me a look, concern, maybe regret. But no one stepped forward. Except for Leah. She worked in UX. Brilliant mind. Kind heart. She slipped me a sticky note as I closed the last flap on my box. "You didn't deserve this." It was written in green ink. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside the mug. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just stood, looked around the room I helped shape, and gave a nod to no one in particular. Then I left. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the fact that my own wife was upstairs pretending like I'd never mattered. Or maybe it was because I felt a shift inside me, something breaking off, something being born. The door opened. I stepped out, the box tucked under my arm like a symbol of quiet defeat or quiet victory, depending on how you framed it. As I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. "Reed Dalton, can you meet Thursday?" I stared at the screen, then typed back. "Yes, noon works." And right then, right as I hit send, another text came through. This time, from Aria, one of the junior associates in client management. She'd been shadowing me for months. Smart girl. Good instincts. Her message? Everyone's talking. What happened? I ignored it. Not out of malice. I just wasn't interested in being the next round of office gossip. I placed the box carefully in the back seat of my car and closed the door with intention. Not anger. Not shame. Just finality. You know, when I first joined Larkwell, Miranda and I used to carpool. We'd drive in together, listening to old rock ballads, talking about client ideas and what we wanted our futures to look like. But over the last year, separate cars, separate calendars, separate everything. It's like we stopped being us the minute she stepped into that corner office. I used to think love could survive anything. Turns out, it can't survive being managed like a staff member. Driving home, I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. It felt cleansing. Like I was finally stepping out of a long, airless meeting that had lasted 3 years. When I got to my apartment, I placed the box on the kitchen island and stared at it. Everything I had brought into that office over 6 years was now contained in a single cardboard square. That should have felt like failure. But it didn't. It felt like I was finally packing up someone else's expectations and getting ready to live by mine. I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "What I want now." I didn't fill it in yet, but I would. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting on a performance review. I wasn't waiting on a spouse to validate my worth. I wasn't waiting for a meeting invite to prove I belonged. I was going to make my own. Starting Thursday. By the time Thursday rolled around, I had reread Dalton's message at least 10 times. "We've got something you might want to see." Not, "We'd like to learn more about you." Not, "Thanks for your interest." No, Reed wasn't fishing for talent. He knew what I could do. And now, after Miranda had done what she did, I was free to prove it, without guilt, without hiding, without looking over my shoulder in case she walked into the room and suddenly decided I was overstepping. That morning, I pulled my best blazer from the back of my closet. Not the one I wore for office presentations, this one was tailored, dark gray, subtle plaid lining. It said, "I don't need your approval, I'm already hired." I shaved. I actually shaved. That's how serious it felt. When I arrived at Dalton Nexus headquarters, I realized this was a whole different league. Larkwell had rented office space on the 6th floor of a dated corporate tower with beige carpets and a view of the alley behind a seafood place. Dalton Nexus? They owned a glass tower with rooftop gardens and an art installation in the lobby that probably cost more than Miranda's Tesla. I checked in at the front desk, got my visitor badge, and was greeted by a sharply dressed woman named Naira, who introduced herself as Reed's executive coordinator. "Mr. Dalton's expecting you, Mr. Hale." Not Everett. Not Miranda's husband. Just Mr. Hale. It felt good. Cleaner. Like I was being given my name back. We took the elevator to the 28th floor. The door opened to a wide, open-concept space filled with glass, greenery, and people who didn't look like they were just surviving their careers. They looked like they owned them. Reed met me at the entrance of a modest but beautiful office that overlooked the river. "Everett," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thanks for coming on short notice. Thanks for having me. And please, don't hold the blazer against me. I overdressed." He chuckled. "I respect the commitment." We sat. No pitch deck. No presentation. No resume review. Just two people who had known of each other from across professional lines for years. "I heard about your exit from Larkwell," he said after a moment. I raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." He nodded. "It wasn't my place to mention it Tuesday, but I knew. In fact, that's part of why I moved this meeting up." I said nothing. Let him talk. "We've been reevaluating our agency partnerships for months. Larkwell's work was strong, but inconsistent, and that inconsistency stopped with you. The moment you were gone, our account rep changed, and our campaign suffered immediately." "That was quick," I said. "We have tracking metrics," Reed replied. "We noticed the impact of your absence within 48 hours. He leaned forward then, clasping his hands. "I'll be direct with you. This isn't an interview. It's a job offer." I blinked. He wasn't bluffing. He pulled out a folder, opened it, and slid it across the desk. "Director of Strategic Development. You'd be building and leading our internal marketing team. Total freedom. Budget authority. No handcuffs. Salary packages inside. Take the night to think it over." I looked down. The number staring back at me was nearly double what I made at Larkwell. More than I had ever dared to ask Miranda for, Because I knew the conversation would be spun into a moral debate about nepotism. Reed leaned back, letting me absorb it. It's not charity, he said. It's market rate for someone with your record. You're not here because you're available. You're here because we've been watching for a while. I swallowed. Not because I was nervous, but because I finally felt seen. Not tolerated. Not tolerated in silence, but wanted. Can I be honest? I asked. Reed nodded. Please. I tapped the paper. This is the first time in 3 years someone looked at my work and called it valuable without making me feel like I was asking for too much. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just said, then let this be the last time you settle. I took the folder. Didn't sign it then and there. Out of respect. Out of professionalism. Out of the fact that I wanted to walk into this decision with clarity, not reaction. As I left the building, the sun hit just right. I looked out over the Riverwalk and thought about how Miranda used to call me a dreamer when I wanted to pitch to Dalton Nexus directly. They're out of our league, she'd said once. No? I was walking into the heart of their operation with an offer to lead. And Miranda? She had no idea what was coming. 3 days. That's how long it took for the ripple to become a wave. On the surface, it looked like a standard business transaction, one marketing contract shifting to another agency. Happens all the time, right? But when the account represents 30% of your annual revenue, it doesn't just sting, it slices. And when that account leaves because the very strategist who built it, me, was escorted out like some liability, well, then it's not just a business loss. It's personal. I was sitting at my new desk at Dalton Nexus. Yes, my desk. Full window view, sleek walnut finish, ergonomically designed chair. Not a cubicle. Not a hand-me-down station in the corner. This office had a door, and the nameplate outside said Everett Hale, Director of Strategic Development. It still didn't feel real. Until 11:02 a.m., when I received a CC on an outgoing client communication. Subject, Transition of Services. To Miranda Vale, CEO, Larkwell and Company. From Reed Dalton, CEO, Dalton Nexus. CC. Everett Hale, Director of Strategic Development. Dear Ms. Vale, after thorough internal review and strategic realignment, Dalton Nexus has made the decision to terminate our agency partnership with Larkwell and Company, effective immediately. We are grateful for the work your team has provided over the past several years and wish you continued success. All marketing assets and live campaign responsibilities will transition to our new internal department, overseen by Mr. Everett Hale. Please arrange the secure transfer of all materials by end of business Friday. Regards, Reed Dalton, CEO, Dalton Nexus. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Not because I was shocked, but because the poetic timing of it all landed with the weight of poetic justice. This was Miranda's moment. Her inbox, her boardroom, her weekly executive update. All of it was about to catch fire. And I hadn't lifted a single match. I didn't say a word against her. Didn't beg Dalton Nexus to drop Larkwell. Didn't craft a vindictive memo behind the scenes. All I did was exist. And that was enough. A knock at my door broke my thoughts. It was Tessa, one of my new team members. Bright, sharp, and about 5 steps ahead of most in the room. Everything good? She asked. I smiled. Better than good. Everything's in motion. She gave a nod. I just got looped in on the transition protocol. I'll start pulling the asset list. Appreciate it. When she left, I opened my inbox again, this time to the internal Slack channel. Notifications were buzzing. Quiet messages from people still at Larkwell. From Jared, Design. Just saw the news. That's got a sting over there. From Leah, UX. You're in the driver's seat now, aren't you? From Aria, Accounts. Miranda's door has been closed all morning. No one's talking. We all know why. The irony was too rich. She fired me for disloyalty. Now she was losing her biggest client because of that decision. What do you call that? Karma? Justice? The boomerang effect? I called it clarity. She didn't just lose a strategist. She lost her credibility. Because you don't throw away your MVP and expect the stadium to stay full. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize that. At 2:16 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number. I didn't need to guess. Miranda. I assume you had something to do with this? No greeting. No grace. Just deflection. I stared at it. Thought about responding. Something measured. Something calm. Something like. Only thing I did was my job. Just not for you anymore. But instead, I left her on read. Because nothing speaks louder than silence. By Friday morning, I didn't need insider updates. The industry buzz was doing all the talking. Larkwell and Company, once positioned as a rising star in regional brand strategy, was suddenly the subject of subtle side glances and clipped conversations in glass-walled boardrooms. The chatter wasn't loud, but it was relentless. You know that corporate murmur, the kind that spreads like smoke, no flames in sight, but everyone can smell the burn. And at the center of it all? Miranda Vale. The woman who had once commanded attention like she invented gravity. Now she was struggling to hold the room. I didn't need to hear the exact words. I'd worked there long enough to know how the whispers would sound. They lost Dalton Nexus? That's almost a third of their Q2 pipeline. Who was managing that account? Wait, wasn't it her husband? Yeah, that part was spreading too. Apparently, a few employees, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of spite, had confirmed the details to key clients. And once word got out that Miranda had fired her husband, who was the lead strategist on the Dalton account, 3 days before the partnership was canceled, well, that didn't look like a leadership win. That looked like emotional incompetence. At Dalton Nexus, we weren't celebrating. That's not the culture here. Reed wasn't gloating. My team was just focused, getting the transition done smoothly. No drama, no rubbing salt in the wound. But me? I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the poetic symmetry of it all. Around noon, I got a Slack ping from Tessa. FYI, Miranda reached out. Want a Zoom call about the timeline? You want me to respond? I typed back. You can handle it. Keep it polite. Keep it tight. Nothing extra. She sent a thumbs up emoji and left it at that. Professionalism. Precision. Exactly how I wanted this played. But a few minutes later, another message came in, this time to my phone. Aria, accounts, Larkwell. Miranda's pacing the floor. CMO just stormed out of a meeting. They're in meltdown mode. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Miranda had made her choice. She framed it as company loyalty, painted my quiet job search as betrayal. But what she really did was remove the one person keeping the ship balanced. And the crew? They were starting to notice. By late afternoon, Leah, my old colleague from UX, sent a picture. It was a grainy snapshot of the Larkwell whiteboard from their strategy room. Under the heading Q2 Revenue Goals, red flagged clients, 3 names were circled in red marker. And at the top, Dalton Nexus, terminated. I stared at the photo for a while, not with pride, but with resolve. I didn't engineer this collapse. I didn't manipulate anyone. I hadn't sent a single bad word about Miranda to Reed or the board. I'd just left and done my job better somewhere else. The truth had done the rest. And now, the company I had built half of, brick by strategic brick, was fraying at the seams because the one person who should have protected its foundation decided her ego came first. What's the old saying? The fish rots from the head. As the day wrapped up, Reed stopped by my office. You good with the timeline? He asked. Yeah, I said. We're moving faster than expected. The team's solid. He leaned against the doorframe. Miranda reached out to me this morning. Very polite. Very stiff. Asked if we'd reconsider. I arched an eyebrow. And he smirked. I told her we've already transitioned 80% of the materials, and that our internal results have already improved since bringing you on board. He paused. She didn't respond. I nodded slowly. I imagined she wouldn't. Reed stepped back. You ever need time? Let me know. This kind of situation. I know it's personal. I smiled. It used to be. No? It's just business. And I meant it. Because somewhere between being fired by the woman I loved and being hired by someone who believed in me, I stopped needing closure. I didn't need Miranda to apologize. I didn't need Larkwell to collapse. All I needed was the room to rise. And now I had it. Monday morning started the way I liked it now, quiet. Controlled. I sipped my coffee, no longer racing the clock, no longer dreading Miranda's voice behind a closed door. I had my own door now. And it stayed open. Just before 9 a.m., I checked my inbox. A new message caught my attention. The sender? Carlin Royce, senior board member, Larkwell and Company. Subject, request for meeting, urgent. I leaned back in my chair, sipping slowly. Carlin Royce was no lightweight. A shark in a tailored suit. One of the original founders. He rarely involved himself in internal personnel drama, unless something was on fire. And I knew exactly what was burning. I opened the email. Dear Mr. Hale, I hope this message finds you well. I understand there was an incident last week involving your employment with Larkwell and Company, and I would like the opportunity to discuss this further with you directly. Please let me know if you'd be available for a brief conversation today or tomorrow at your convenience. Best regards. Carlin Royce, Senior Board Member, Larkwell and Company. Polite, polished, desperate. I smiled, but I didn't answer right away. I finished my coffee. Took a call with Tessa about the upcoming branding rollout. Walked through our campaign metrics with the dev team. Only after I'd taken care of my house did I respond to the one that tried to evict me. Hi, Carlin. Thank you for reaching out. I'm available for a brief phone call at 4:30 p.m. today. Let me know if that works. Everett Hale. He replied in 6 minutes flat. That told me everything I needed to know. At 4:29 p.m., my phone rang. Mr. Hale, Carlin said, voice smooth and deliberate. Thank you for taking the time. Of course, I said. What can I do for you? I'll get straight to it. I've reviewed your personnel file, your performance, your contributions to our client portfolio, and frankly, your sudden dismissal came as a surprise. I didn't respond. He continued. I also understand you've accepted a new position. That's correct. A leadership position, I assume? You assume correctly. There was a pause, long enough to make it awkward. We'd like to offer reinstatement, he said, with full salary adjustment and a title promotion. Senior Vice President of Strategic Growth. We're also prepared to offer a 10% signing bonus should you choose to return. It was a generous offer. On paper. But paper never told the whole story. Carlin, I said gently, that's very generous. But I've moved on. I'm leading an internal division now. I have ownership over strategy. I have a team I believe in. And I'm building something new. There was another pause, this one colder. This isn't just about you, he said, dropping the friendly tone. We're trying to protect a structure that's unraveling. There it was. The truth. They didn't want me back for me. They wanted the stability I brought. They wanted the client comfort I represented. They wanted to plug the leak before the boat sank. Too late. I understand, I said. And I wish you luck. But going back to Larkwell would mean stepping back into a space where I wasn't seen until I left. You don't fix that with a title. He sighed. I suppose I can't convince you. No, I said. But I appreciate the call. He hesitated one more time. For what it's worth, you were never the problem. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, I know. And I hung up. No anger. No gloating. Just peace. Because here's the thing about late offers. They always come too late. Tuesday morning started early. I like being the first one in. There's something clean about an untouched office, the quiet hum of systems warming up, the city outside still rubbing sleep from its eyes. It feels like momentum waiting to happen. I sat at the head of the long table in the strategy room, my room now. Not borrowed space. Not Miranda's overflow meeting room. Mine. Tessa entered first, followed by Wes, then Bria and Nate. My team. Sharp minds, unjaded by old systems. People who wanted to build, not just follow. We had gathered to finalize the rollout of our first full in-house campaign for Dalton Nexus. The rebranding package for a tech client we'd onboard just last week. We were ahead of schedule, something I couldn't remember saying once in the last 2 years at Larkwell. At 9:12 a.m., Reed walked in with his coffee. Morning all. Before we dive into the client agenda, we need your take on something, Everett. He slid a thick folder onto the table and tapped the front. Proposal evaluations. I flipped it open. 3 agencies. One of them was Larkwell and Company. I didn't blink. Their contract is up for renewal next month, Reed explained. They submitted a revised proposal, new lead strategist, updated pricing, bundled services. He said it neutrally, but I could feel the question beneath it. What do we do with the company that fired you? The room waited for my reaction. They were professionals, but they were also human. They'd heard whispers. They knew the history. I closed the folder and looked around. Evaluate them the same way we would anyone else. Reed raised an eyebrow. Even after what happened? Especially after, I replied. If we keep them on, it's because they're the best option. If we cut them, it's because someone else earned it, not because of history. Bria smiled, just barely. Tessa nodded and said, You sure you're okay leading that? Absolutely, I said. I don't have time for revenge. I have a department to build. But that wasn't the whole truth. I wasn't cold. I wasn't detached. I just didn't need to engineer anything. Because I had already seen the proposal. I had already reviewed the campaign data. And I already knew Larkwell's numbers were flat. Their presentation templated. The lead strategist was someone I had mentored 2 years ago, a decent worker, but not ready for an account of this size. In short, they weren't the best option. So when the final decision came down from Dalton's executive team 2 days later, I wasn't surprised. The email was short, crisp, corporate, to Miranda Vale. CC, Everett Hale. Subject, Dalton Nexus Agency Realignment. Dear Ms. Vale, following a comprehensive review of submitted proposals, Dalton Nexus has decided to transition its account to an internal strategic division under the direction of Mr. Everett Hale. We appreciate your agency's past efforts and professionalism, and we wish you continued success with your other partnerships. Please coordinate asset transfer with our team by end of day Friday. Sincerely, Reed Dalton, CEO, Dalton Nexus. There it was. Not revenge, just results. No fire, no rage, just the quiet closing of a door. I didn't need Miranda to suffer. I just needed to succeed. Publicly, calmly, with such undeniable precision that silence became the only appropriate response. At 4:47 p.m., I got a Slack from Tessa. Miranda's assistant replied. She asked if we could extend the deadline. I replied, "Tell her the deadline is firm, but wish her well." Then I logged off, went home, poured a glass of wine, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder, because I wasn't surviving someone else's system anymore. I was running mine. I didn't respond to Miranda's last message. You remember it, right? I assume you had something to do with this? It sat there on my phone screen like a pebble tossed into a river, pointless, barely making a ripple. I left it unread, not out of spite, but because I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't need her to know the inner workings of my new life, my new role, my new clarity. What could I possibly say that wouldn't already be made clear by the fact that she had lost Dalton Nexus, and I was now overseeing everything she used to brag about having a grip on? She didn't deserve a response. She deserved reflection. And I hoped, somewhere behind her thick office door, that she was doing exactly that. But knowing Miranda, I doubted it. Because Miranda Vale had spent years learning how to silence guilt and dress it up in ambition. She could turn a blind eye to reality so long as her name stayed on the wall and the headlines stayed impressive. That's why I didn't gloat. Because someone like her would only see it as fuel, a challenge. She wouldn't hear it as the mirror I intended it to be. So instead of replying to her text, I moved forward. I focused on the team. We had just onboarded a new startup client, Viridian Labs, a scrappy, well-funded group out of San Diego looking to disrupt data privacy in a real way. They'd been referred by one of Dalton's VPs, and they wanted something bold. Braver than the safe campaigns Larkwell had been pitching for years. We brainstormed late into Thursday night. Maria had this wild idea of turning data ownership into a physical metaphor, a digital vault with keys made of people's faces. Wes built out a UI prototype in less than 4 hours. And Tessa coordinated a lightning-fast user survey for feedback over the weekend. I was surrounded by the kind of energy I'd nearly forgotten existed in this industry, the thrill of creation, of possibility, of being in the room before the win, not just showing up to collect it. And in the quiet between team check-ins and client calls, the notifications started coming in. LinkedIn, Twitter, Slack whispers from old colleagues. Did you see the press release? Miranda's stepping back from day-to-day operations. Larkwell board issued a realignment strategy memo to all staff. I didn't even open the full articles. The headlines were enough. She wasn't fired, but she was being shifted. Soft language, polite framing, refocusing on long-term vision, temporary delegation of operations to senior leadership, personal recalibration, all the corporate synonyms for you lost control, and we need someone else at the wheel. I sat back in my chair, watching the city blur behind the glass. If you had told me 3 months ago that Miranda would no longer be leading Larkwell, I would have laughed. Hell, I wouldn't have even entertained the thought. She was built for power, practically born in a power suit. Into the outside world, she was invincible. But now? Now her silence was louder than her presence ever had been. She didn't send another message. She didn't call. She didn't try to apologize or explain or rewrite the story. And I didn't chase one. Because closure doesn't come from the people who hurt you. It comes from what you choose to do after. And I was choosing to build something better. 1 week later, I was invited to speak on a marketing panel hosted by Viridian Labs. Small venue. Thoughtful audience. But they wanted to hear from people who'd navigated the jump from traditional agency structures to internal strategy leadership. The moderator, a sharp journalist named Claire Riddick, asked me halfway through. Mr. Hale, what advice would you give to someone who's been passed over repeatedly, undervalued by people who claim to support them? I paused, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what not to say. I didn't mention Miranda. I didn't mention the boardroom betrayal. I didn't even mention Larkwell. Instead, I said, stop waiting for recognition. Build something they can't ignore. The audience nodded. Claire gave a soft smile. But I wasn't done. You have to understand your value before anyone else will. That means keeping the receipts, your wins, your numbers, your hours. It means knowing what you bring to the table even if they keep pulling the chair out from under you. Has that been your experience? She asked gently. I looked out over the rows of attentive eyes. It was, I said, but it's not anymore. After the panel, several attendees came up to chat. One was a young strategist from New York, Arjun, who said, I've been working under a founder who reminds me a lot of your story. Visionary, but dismissive. Everything goes through him, even when he's wrong. I asked, have you started looking elsewhere? He looked embarrassed. I have, but it feels disloyal. I smiled. There's nothing disloyal about knowing when you've outgrown your cage. He stared at me like something just clicked. And that? That was the real win. It wasn't the paycheck. It wasn't the office. It was that I was finally using my experience as something more than a cautionary tale. I was using it as a blueprint. That night, back at home, I poured myself a drink and scrolled through my inbox. Buried between two client memos was a LinkedIn notification. Miranda Vale has updated her job title, founder and strategic consultant, Vale Advisory Group. So she'd spun it into something new. I wasn't surprised. She was always good at brand pivots. If anything, I admired her ability to reframe chaos into opportunity. But it was the message underneath that caught my eye. From Jessica L., receptionist, Larkwell. Just wanted you to know, since you left, 5 more people have followed. Aria's freelancing now, Jared's at Prism, and I'm giving my notice next week. You were the only one who ever made that place feel safe to grow. Thank you for showing us there's life after Larkwell. I read it twice, then a third time, and only then did I allow myself one long, slow breath. Because that was the reply I never expected. It didn't come from Miranda. It came from the people I left behind, people who had once watched me carry a cardboard box through the hallway in silence. Now they were building exits of their own, not out of rebellion, out of realization. Miranda's mistake hadn't just been firing me. Her mistake was believing that my presence was expendable when, in truth, it was the glue. And once that glue was gone, things didn't fall apart overnight. But they did fall. Not with drama. Not with sirens. Just quietly. Like a foundation crumbling beneath a house with too many floors stacked on ego. And all I had to do was walk away. No revenge plot. No PR scandal. No social media tirade. Just results. That weekend, I met Reed and his wife for dinner. Casual place, candlelit tables, no suits in sight. Over appetizers, he raised a glass. To peace, he said, in the power of silence. I chuckled, into knowing when not to reply. He clinked my glass. The greatest strategy of all. And as we ate, laughed, and talked about where the next quarter would take us, I realized something profound. You don't need to shout when you're already being heard. 1 year later, I found myself back at the same hotel ballroom where Miranda and I once attended a regional business leadership gala together. She had worn a sharp black dress with shoulder pads that screamed command. I'd worn the only decent suit I had back then, too snug in the shoulders but clean. That night, she was called to the stage to accept a Rising Executive Award. I clapped the loudest. I remember leaning over and whispering, "That's my wife," with a stupid, proud grin. Funny how time changes everything. Tonight, I was the one walking up to the stage. Same hotel, different name on the invitation. Everett Hale, finalist, Industry Vanguard Award. I stood in front of a sea of tables, executives, marketing veterans, tech disruptors, and polished PR reps. And instead of a tight suit, I wore one that fit perfectly, dark charcoal with subtle lapel piping. No nerves. No weight on my chest. Just breath. Just freedom. I shook the presenter's hand, accepted the plaque, and stepped up to the mic. I hadn't prepared a speech. I didn't need to, because what I had to say wasn't rehearsed. It was lived. Thank you, I began, scanning the room. A year ago, I walked out of a building with a cardboard box in one hand, and the feeling that 6 years of work had been erased in a single breath. There was a small murmur. I smiled. But the truth is it hadn't. Because you can't erase value. You can ignore it. You can underpay it. You can pretend it doesn't exist to preserve your own narrative. But real value? It doesn't vanish. It just finds a new home. I paused. I found mine at Dalton Nexus. Not because they gave me a title, but because they let me build something. And building something, that's always worth more than protecting something broken. The applause wasn't loud. It wasn't thunderous. It was steady, quiet, like people nodding inside their own stories. Because they understood. They'd lived some version of it, too. After the event, as the crowd thinned and people gathered around dessert trays and exit doors, a woman approached me. Older, silver hair, a dark emerald coat. Elaine Wilcox, former board advisor for Larkwell. We'd met only once, briefly, during a quarterly review years ago. She extended her hand. Everett, she said with a slight smile. You handled that with dignity. Thank you, I replied. That was the only part one could control. She looked at me for a beat, then said, I wish we had seen it sooner. I nodded. Most people don't see it until it's already walking out the door. She didn't argue, just touched my arm gently and moved along. That night, I returned home to a quiet apartment, not empty, just peaceful. The kind of quiet that feels like breathing room, not absence. I poured a glass of scotch, sat by the window. The city lights blinked like reminders that life goes on, regardless of who's watching. Then I opened my laptop, typed in Miranda's name. Her profile had changed again. Miranda Vale, independent consultant board advisor keynote speaker. She was still in the game, still branded, still visible, but the shine had dulled. No more articles quoting her as the next big thing. No fresh awards. A few panel appearances, sure, but the momentum was gone. I clicked out, not out of pettiness, out of finality. And then, the message came. 12 months of silence. No calls. No emails. No texts. Until now. Miranda. You always said you wanted to build something. I guess I finally see what you meant. Congratulations, Everett. You earned it. I just wish I hadn't had to lose everything to understand. I stared at it. It didn't sting. It didn't warm me either. It just was. The echo of a closed chapter. The whisper of someone finally hearing what you were saying long after you stopped speaking. I didn't reply. She hadn't said, I'm sorry. And I didn't need her to. She'd already said the part one needed her to say. You earned it. And that was enough. Because for years, I thought if I just kept being good, loyal, patient, measured, that I'd eventually be rewarded. That Miranda would recognize the weight I carried for both of us. That she'd fight for me like I fought for her. But she didn't. She fought for image, for perception, for position. And when she saw me as a threat to all of that, she cut me out. Clean. Efficient. Like I was just another line item in a quarterly report. What she didn't realize was that she didn't fire an employee. She unshackled a leader. Because leaving Larkwell and leaving her wasn't the end of me. It was the start of me. The real me. The version that didn't apologize for taking up space. The version that didn't edit himself to make others more comfortable. And that version? He was just getting started. A week later, I was scheduled to host an internal team summit at Dalton. All departments. Full collaboration weekend. We called it Vision Week. And at the closing dinner, Tessa raised her glass across the table and said, to Everett, for teaching us that strategy isn't just about where we're going, but about who we become when we get there. The team clinked glasses. And I sat there, humbled. Not because they praised me, but because they saw me. Not as Miranda's husband. Not as the guy who used to be behind the curtain. Not as the mistake that got quietly pushed out the door. But as someone who finally walked through the door he built himself. And it all came back to one phrase. The last thing I said to her, in that cold office, as she slid my badge across the desk and called me disloyal. I wish you well. Back then, it sounded like a farewell. Now it sounds like a boundary. A line between who I was and who I refused to become again. Because forgiveness doesn't mean return. And peace doesn't require proximity. So wherever Miranda is today, whether she's rebuilding or retreating, I do wish her well. Truly. Because letting go of someone who didn't value me gave me the room to discover someone who finally did. Myself. And that's the best revenge of all. Not success. Not applause. Not headlines. Self-respect. Freedom. And the quiet, unshakable power of knowing you never needed them to begin with.